The Kurvani Imperium had reigned for millennia over the Spiral Arm. Their laws, older than many stars, decreed that order and obedience were the cornerstones of civilization. Species that rose to sapience were either absorbed into the galactic order or extinguished if they harbored what the Kurvani called the Flaw, rebellion. To them, rebellion was a sickness, a rot in the bone of progress. Worlds were sterilized if they refused to bow. Cultures that cherished independence were culled, their histories wiped clean, their ruins left as silent warnings across the stars. When the first Earth signal, an erratic, chaotic burst of radio noise, television dramas, war broadcasts, music layered atop violence, layered atop hope, spilled into the void, the Kurvani seers listened with disdain. They classified humanity as pre-ascendant vermin and predicted their rapid self-destruction. Left to themselves, humans would implode, erasing their own existence before they could threaten the order of the Imperium. But predictions, like laws, are fragile in the face of the unexpected. By the time the Kurvani ships entered Sol's space, humanity had already leapt beyond their expectations. Earth was no unified beacon of peace. It was a planet that had clawed its way into the stars, dragging the scars of 1,000 wars with it. Mars was scarred red by human colonies warring over ice and metal. The Jovian moons were dotted with grim outposts, ruthless in their pragmatism. No single government ruled Earth. Instead, alliances shifted like the surface of a boiling sea, fierce and mercurial. The Kurvani High Arbiter, HFY, decreed that humanity would be offered conditional vassalage. A flotilla of gleaming dreadnoughts appeared over Earth, their arrival met with stunned silence. The world's leaders gathered in hurried, encrypted councils. Humanity had long imagined they were alone. They had not imagined that meeting another intelligence would begin with an ultimatum. The message was simple: surrender your autonomy or be restructured under Kurvani stewardship. 1,000 worlds had complied without a shot fired. The seers expected Earth to do the same, their weakness obvious in their divided governments, their petty infighting. Instead, Earth's reply stunned them. The United Nations crumbled within hours of the transmission, replaced by an emergency council composed not of politicians, but of survivors, warlords, scientists, insurgents, and leaders forged by conflict. It was a tapestry of humanity's most dangerous minds. Their response was a terse, ancient phrase transmitted in hundreds of languages at once. "We do not kneel." The first shots were fired above Luna. The Kurvani disintegrated Earth's crude defense satellites with contemptuous ease. Human warships, tiny in comparison, launched desperate, uncoordinated attacks that were easily broken. In days, the major orbital stations were burned wreckage. But something happened that the seers had not foreseen. Instead of collapsing, humanity fractured, only to reforge itself into something new. Militias emerged from every ruined nation. Scientists worked in hidden labs, jury-rigging weapons that should not have worked. Ships were built in hollowed-out asteroids, patched together from stolen Kurvani tech and old Earth industry. Entire cities were abandoned and repurposed into war foundries. The Kurvani could not comprehend it. Their philosophy dictated that a civilization either obeyed or perished. Humanity did neither. Every defeat only hardened them. Every slaughter seeded new cells of resistance. When a Kurvani garrison razed Santiago to ash, 5 new rebel fleets rose from the survivors. When the oceans of the Atlantic were boiled by orbital bombardment, underwater colonies began spawning torpedo ships that harassed supply lines. Rebellion was not seen as a failure of governance on Earth. It was legacy. It was how their nations had been forged, how their people had survived tyrants and empires. It was not a deviation from their nature, but the essence of it. Inside the labyrinthine halls of the Imperium's Grand Conclave, dissent began to grow among the seers. Some argued that humanity was a contagion, a paradox that could not be allowed to fester. Others urged caution, warning that Earth was demonstrating a strategic and adaptive evolution that had no precedent. High Arbiter HFY silenced them all with a decree. Humanity would be broken, not through extermination but through a method perfected over eons: slow, total suppression. Take their water, their air, their hope. Strip away the conditions that allowed rebellion to take root. It had worked countless times before. But even as Kurvani blockades encircled Earth, cutting off trade and light, humanity found ways to endure. Ancient nuclear plants were reignited, solar sails unfurled above shattered cities. New forms of communication evolved, using quantum entanglement and old-fashioned courier ships to relay commands. They refused to accept extinction. They refused to believe in inevitability. Humanity, as battered and bloodied as they were, had a secret weapon that the Kurvani had no defense against: the certainty that freedom was worth any price. Among the rising human factions, one figure began to emerge, spoken of in whispers first, then in rallying cries that echoed across the void. Admiral Elias Rourke, a man with no nation, no banner, only a singular purpose: unite the fractured fleets, ignite a rebellion not just to survive, but to conquer. The Kurvani dismissed him at first, another minor warlord among many, another blip of resistance that would be extinguished by time. They would soon learn that humanity's rebellion was not a flaw. It was a storm, and it had only just begun. Admiral Elias Rourke did not raise a single banner because he knew no single banner could contain the storm that Earth was becoming. He moved through the wreckage of humanity's former powers like a force of nature, forging alliances by necessity rather than trust. Rival warlords and corporate fiefdoms either bent to his vision or were left behind, consumed by the growing momentum of unified resistance. The first major victory came not above Earth, but beyond Saturn. The Kurvani's outpost on Titan had served as a critical logistics hub, processing antimatter and exotic fuels harvested from the gas giant. It was assumed untouchable, guarded by 4 dreadnoughts and an array of orbital defense grids. No human fleet could challenge it conventionally. Rourke did not attempt to. Instead, he unleashed Operation Harrow. Over months, human engineers and saboteurs infiltrated Titan's understructure. Cargo shipments arriving from the outer colonies concealed living weapons, teams of insurgents trained to live without light, without sound, without hope for rescue. They hollowed out the facility from within, planting hundreds of synchronized fusion charges. On the day of the assault, Rourke's fleet of converted mining vessels and retrofitted haulers attacked openly, drawing Kurvani attention. As the dreadnoughts turned their massive cannons on the ragtag attackers, Titan itself shuddered and burned from the inside out. The entire logistics hub was reduced to a cratered tomb, along with its defenders. For the first time, a Kurvani force was utterly annihilated by humans. Shock rippled through the Imperium's aristocracy. Never before had a pre-ascendant species delivered such a humiliation. The High Arbiter ordered 1,000 more ships to Earth's sector, but already it was too late. The myth of Kurvani invincibility was broken. Human cells from Europa to the Kuiper Belt rose in revolt, inspired by the impossible. Rourke's legend spread with the velocity of a collapsing star. He did not preach ideology. He spoke only of survival, of a future where humanity would not be governed by distant, arrogant masters. His speeches, broadcast on pirated Kurvani frequencies, became rallying calls for 100 new fleets. His fleets were a fusion of chaos and calculation, ships stitched from Kurvani wrecks and human scrap, crews that sang old Earth battle hymns and scrawled their ancestors' names across their hulls. Yet even as humanity's rebellion grew, new threats emerged. Within the Imperium, certain factions saw the failure of suppression as an opportunity. The noble houses of the Varn-Ka and the merchant guilds of Solvar began to whisper treason. If humanity could not be crushed, perhaps it could be used. Agents, both human collaborators and alien spies, began infiltrating Rourke's growing confederacy. Offers were made: armistice, autonomy, technology beyond human dreams. If humanity would only swear loyalty, not to the Imperium but to new masters, discontent within the ancient order. Rourke's answer was unequivocal. He exposed the infiltrators in a brutal series of trials broadcast live across the outer colonies. Betrayers were stripped of name and honor, left adrift in escape pods with nothing but their shame. To those who sought to divide them, Rourke's message was as cold and sharp as the void. Humanity will forge its own destiny. No chains, no kings. However, humanity's survival was not guaranteed. The Kurvani's response to Titan's fall was merciless. They deployed new weapons, biocontagions tailored to human DNA, kinetic strikes against civilian habitats, psychological warfare aimed at breaking humanity's will from within. Entire cities in orbit around Neptune went silent, their populations reduced to whispers and frozen blood. The surface of Ganymede boiled as orbital bombardments rendered its atmosphere toxic. Every victory seemed to birth a new horror, every rebellion a new atrocity. Still they endured. Still they fought. Still they adapted. Scientists on Earth's shattered surface uncovered secrets in Kurvani biotech, twisting them into cures and countermeasures. Engineers married human ingenuity with alien physics, creating weapons the Imperium had no doctrine to counter. Tactical innovations emerged overnight: stealth-shielded railguns, relativistic kill vehicles disguised as civilian transports, swarm drones built from recycled mining bots. The Kurvani realized too late that humanity's strength was not merely in its numbers or its rage. It was in their refusal to remain what they were yesterday. Change was the human constant, they were evolution incarnate. Above the debris-strewn rings of Uranus, a new kind of human ship was unveiled. The Tempest-class strike cruiser, forged from Curvani composite alloys but driven by human-core AI, armed with weapons both brutal and elegant. It was faster, more modular, more unpredictable than anything the Imperium had ever fielded. The first engagement involving the Tempest fleet shattered a Curvani carrier division in less than an hour. In the aftermath, Rourke issued a statement. "You call our rebellion a flaw, we call it our inheritance." The word spread farther than Rourke ever intended. On worlds deep within the Imperium, oppressed species began to question, to hope. Whispered prayers spoke the name of Earth, not as a distant, savage world, but as a promise that rebellion could be more than a death sentence. The seeds of revolution, once thought extinct across the stars, began to stir. But Rourke knew that the real battle was yet to come. The Curvani High Conclave, for the first time in millennia, had declared a law of annihilation, not just the subjugation of Earth, its utter erasure. An entire crusade armada was assembling, larger than anything humanity had ever faced. Tens of thousands of ships, legions of battle-hardened warriors, planet-cracking weapons designed to scour all life from a system. They were coming, and humanity would have to do the impossible once more. Not merely to survive, but to endure and become something greater than the Imperium had ever imagined. The Curvani Crusade Armada crossed the heliopause like a black tide. Its mass blotted out the distant light of the stars, each vessel an engine of perfect, merciless extermination. Above the swirling ice fields of the Uit Cloud, human scouts first sighted the vanguard forces, sleek destroyers flanked by carriers that birthed endless swarms of assault drones. There would be no negotiation, no offers of vassalage. This was extermination in its purest form. Admiral Rourke convened the War Council aboard the Aegis Ascendant, a Leviathan-class carrier that had once been a floating ruin orbiting Mars. Now it served as the beating heart of humanity's last stand. Around him gathered the architects of survival. Ren Callas, the cybernetic strategist from the drowned remains of New Kyoto, Colonel Idris Vance, commander of the Titan Ghost Brigades, and Dr. Sarai Lobanov, who had transformed broken human genetics into a shield against Curvani biowarfare. Maps of Sol's battered system glowed above them, routes traced in blood-red vectors. They had nowhere left to run. Retreat was not an option. "We face extinction," Rourke said, his voice iron and fire. "So we choose annihilation too, not of ourselves but of the myth that they are invincible." Thus was born Operation Breakwater. Instead of defending Earth directly, humanity would wage a campaign of attrition across the outer system. Each gas giant's moons, every forgotten station, every derelict mining outpost would become a fortress or a trap. They would turn Sol itself into a labyrinth of death. The opening salvos came near Neptune. Rourke's forces seeded the ice fields with cloaked mines and kinetic lances that detonated with relativistic fury. Curvani vanguard ships were torn apart, their hulls splintered like glass against invisible walls. Every ship that tried to break through was met with relentless, coordinated strikes, human fleets appearing and vanishing like wraiths. The Crusade Armada was vast beyond reason, but its very size became its weakness. Communication lag, logistical strain, and the unrelenting psychological assault wore at the disciplined Curvani ranks. They were creatures of doctrine and rigidity, trained to expect submission or simple, savage resistance. What they encountered instead was warfare as chaos incarnate, unpredictable, adaptive, merciless. The Battle of Enceladus was a turning point. The Curvani deployed planetary bombardment weapons to sterilize the moons of Saturn. But hidden within the icy crusts were fusion cores wired to detonators keyed to human life signs. As Curvani troops disembarked, the ground itself erupted. Dozens of elite divisions were annihilated in moments. When the surviving commanders called for orbital support, they found their communications hijacked. Rourke's voice spoke through their own channels, not with threats but with a promise. "You will not break us, you will not bury us, you will only feed the fire you fear." Morale among the Crusade Armada faltered for the first time. Among the Curvani leadership, debates turned to bitter infighting. Some advocated immediate withdrawal, arguing that humanity was a disease too virulent to contain by conventional means. Others demanded escalation, to crack Earth's crust with gravitic weapons, to scorch every trace of humanity from the bones of the planet. High Arbiter Serax Viol, increasingly desperate, authorized the use of the Black Laws, technologies so devastating they had been outlawed even by the Imperium's own ancient codes. But humanity, as ever, had already moved beyond expectation. In secret, Earth-surviving think tanks and shipyards had birthed a new class of weapon, the Archon Lance. It was not a conventional superweapon. It was a philosophy made manifest, a living demonstration of humanity's core truth, that rebellion was evolution. Using data stolen from Kervani core worlds, human scientists created a system-wide quantum disruption field designed not to destroy but to cripple. The Archon Lance would scatter and fragment Kervani fleet communications, turn their own sophisticated targeting systems against them, and sow chaos among their ranks. Deploying it required one terrible risk. The Lance had to be activated from within the heart of the enemy fleet. Captain Amira Solano, youngest daughter of a ruined Terran dynasty, volunteered. Her ship, the Valkyrie's Mercy, would become the spearpoint. At the edge of Jupiter's magnetic storms, the Valkyrie's Mercy plunged into the teeth of the Crusade Armada. Kervani cruisers swarmed to intercept. Shields shattered, hull plating burned away. Crew members died by the dozen, holding the line long enough for Solano to reach critical mass. With a single, defiant transmission, she triggered the Archon Lance. The effect was instantaneous. Across the Crusade Armada, systems crashed. Warships turned their guns on allies, mistaking friend for foe. Dreadnoughts collided in deadly confusion. Supply lines collapsed as couriers vanished into blindfolded jumps. In that moment of perfect disarray, Rourke unleashed the second phase of Breakwater. Human strike fleets surged from the dark, 1,000 ambushes blooming in synchronized precision. Boarding parties tore through crippled Kervani vessels, seizing technology, capturing prisoners, and broadcasting images of their victories to the entire system. The myth of Kervani invulnerability lay shattered at their feet. Yet the cost was staggering. The Valkyrie's Mercy was lost with all hands. Entire human fleets were reduced to wreckage. Mars itself suffered orbital bombardments that turned its northern colonies to molten glass. But for the first time, victory was not just survival. It was conquest. And as the battered remnants of the Crusade Armada fled toward the void beyond Pluto, hounded by relentless human pursuit, a new reality was born. Humanity was no longer prey. They had become the storm, the catalyst, the flame that would either renew the galaxy or burn it to ash. Admiral Rourke gathered his commanders one final time aboard the Aegis Ascendant, its battered frame now adorned with the sigils of every fallen colony, every lost world. "The Imperium believes rebellion is a flaw," he said, his voice carrying across the battered survivors, "but we know better." He turned, his gaze falling on the stars beyond. "Rebellion is heritage, rebellion is life, and now the galaxy will remember what it means to be free." The wreckage of the Crusade Armada drifted through the outer system, a graveyard of broken titans. Humanity, bloodied but unbowed, stood at the threshold of something greater than survival. For the first time in history, the question was not whether they would live. It was what kind of power they would become. Across the scattered habitats of Sol, Earth's surviving nations convened the first Council of Free Worlds. No longer squabbling states or divided corporations, they assembled as representatives of a new species, one forged in rebellion, tempered by annihilation, united not by government but by shared blood and sacrifice. Admiral Rourke, reluctant to claim power, was nonetheless named first executor by acclamation. Around him coalesced a war government unlike any the galaxy had seen, a coalition of generals, engineers, philosophers, and insurgents who viewed freedom not as a privilege, but as a living covenant. The Council's first act was bold beyond reason. They would not merely rebuild Sol. They would carry the rebellion to the stars. Using stolen Kervani jumpgate schematics, human scientists led by Dr. Lobanov constructed the first Terran-designed FTL corridors, primitive and dangerous compared to Kervani precision, but fast and adaptable. These wild gates were unpredictable, but they gave humanity what no subject race had ever possessed before, the means to strike beyond their prison. Scout flotillas, codenamed Phoenix Wings, launched through the wild gates into unknown space. They found a galaxy far older and more broken than the Kervani propaganda had ever admitted. Entire sectors languished under the Imperium's stagnant grip. Species that had once reached for the stars had been shackled into servitude, their cultures hollowed out, their histories rewritten. On the dying world of Verta Prime, humanity made first contact with the Vortici, a reptilian race whose rebellions had been crushed centuries ago. Now they lived as indentured laborers on what had once been their homeworld. The Vortici expected betrayal, expected humanity to behave like all conquerors. Instead, Rourke's emissaries offered them technology, weapons, and most dangerously, hope. Other species followed: the insectoid Raxari, the crystallinous vein, the outcast machine intelligences of the shard enclaves. Each contact brought new alliances, new understanding. Humanity did not seek to rule them, they sought partners, equals in defiance. Rebellions spread like wildfire. World after world erupted into revolt, their leaders inspired by the impossible victories of Earth. Kurvani governors abandoned outer territories in panic, withdrawing toward their fortified core worlds. The Imperium, once a monolith, began to fracture. But humanity's ascent was not without consequence. The ancient protocols of the galaxy, the ancient pacts made before Earth was even molten rock, began to stir. From the forgotten edges of known space, the eldest awakened. The Vadrassil Concordium, a coalition of ancient species that had once formed the bedrock of galactic civilization, had long watched the Kurvani dominate and corrupt their legacy. They had slumbered, conserving their strength, bound by treaties more sacred than survival. Now they faced a dilemma. Humanity's rebellion was unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed, not a brief flare of defiance, but a wildfire capable of consuming the old order entirely. To the eldest, humanity represented a terrifying possibility that the rules which had preserved civilization for 1,000,000 years were now obsolete. A conclave was summoned on the World Tree Station of Yggdra's Vorn. There, beings older than human language debated whether Earth's children were to be destroyed or embraced. Among them, arguments raged. The Jathral emissaries, fluid beings of living plasma, argued that humanity was too volatile, a danger to the galaxy's fragile stability. The Saradine Choir, beings of pure psionic resonance, sang counterpoint, insisting that stagnation was the greater threat and humanity's disruptive force might rekindle true growth. In the end, no consensus could be reached. Thus the eldest took a terrible middle path. They would test humanity, not with war but with choice. A fleet of envoys was dispatched to the Sol system, bearing a proposition. When the envoy ships entered Earth's orbit, great arcs of shimmering energy, more alive than mechanical, the Council of Free Worlds gathered once more, wary but determined. Rurk stood at the forefront, flanked by captains, scholars, and soldiers whose names were already becoming legend. The envoy's message was delivered in perfect, unaccented Terran standard. You have awakened the galaxy, you have broken the cycle of submission, you may lead or you may destroy, choose your future, choose your price. With that, the envoys offered humanity membership in a new conclave, not as subjects but as stewards, provided they would accept certain ancient tenets: stability above expansion, preservation above disruption, order above passion. The council's chambers erupted into debate. Many saw the offer as salvation, a chance to avoid the endless war that unchecked rebellion would inevitably bring. Others saw it as another gilded cage, another slow death under a different flag. Rurk listened to the arguments in silence. When the council could debate no longer, he stood, his voice cutting through the clamor. We fought not to preserve what was broken, we fought to make something new. We will not chain ourselves to the mistakes of the past. He turned to the envoys, his words iron and certainty. We choose freedom, whatever the cost. The envoys left without further reply. Within hours, entire sectors convulsed with new energy. The eldest had not declared war, but nor would they shield humanity from what was coming. The galaxy would respond, one way or another. Humanity had refused to become caretakers of decay. They had chosen to build their own future. One that would either ignite a renaissance across the stars, or bring the long, cold silence of extinction. But whatever the outcome, it would be by their own hands. For rebellion was not a flaw to them. It was their heritage. In the wake of their refusal, humanity moved faster than ever before. The Council of Free Worlds dissolved the old sectors and declared a new Terran mandate, a living charter that recognized all beings as sovereign provided they chose their own destiny. No emperor, no high arbiter, no ancient codes, only the will to shape the future and the strength to defend it. New fleets were forged not in secret but openly, proudly. The Tempest Vanguard led expeditions into Kurvani space, not as raiders but as liberators. Systems that had known only oppression for millennia fell into chaos, but amid the ashes, new voices rose. The galaxy was not prepared for what came next. World after world joined the Terran cause, not through conquest but by choice. Former slaves, forgotten civilizations, dissident Kurvani themselves. Humanity's rebellion had become a symphony, one no longer played by a single world but by countless stars. Yet even as they advanced, the old powers did not yield quietly. The Kurvani Imperium, reduced to a shadow of its former grandeur, retreated to its bastion worlds. There, desperate to maintain even a semblance of authority, they created the Obsidian Compact, an alliance of the most ruthless remnants of the old order, blending Kurvani technology with forbidden arts from the galaxy's deepest tombs. The Compact unleashed horrors unseen for eons. Bioforged fleets that could self-replicate, devour worlds, and birth new weapons in the void. Psi-forged assassins who turned loyalty into puppetry. Dark matter singularities deployed as tactical weapons, consuming whole flotillas in moments. Humanity's answer was not to match them weapon for weapon. It was to evolve beyond the very nature of the conflict. Dr. Lobanov's breakthroughs in human Kurvani hybrid technology bore unexpected fruit, adaptive neural mesh interfaces that allowed ships and crews to think, react, and adapt as one entity. The first Synapse fleets were born, capable of shifting strategies mid-battle with a speed that no traditional command structure could match. Victory was no longer about numbers or firepower. It was about who could change faster, who could embrace the maelstrom without losing themselves. The final confrontation loomed over the ruins of Praxis Verge, the Kurvani's ancient capital system. The system was a fortress of entropy, thousands of defense layers, weaponized singularities, siege moons capable of cracking planets with a single volley. Around it, the Obsidian Compact gathered its last armies, desperate to crush the Terran Revolution before it became irreversible. Admiral Rourke, grayer now, scarred and heavier with the burden of endless war, stood before the assembled commanders of the Mandate. Behind him stretched the greatest fleet humanity and its allies had ever built, ships crafted from the bones of dead civilizations, engines powered by the dreams of the free, weapons that had no name in any tongue. He said only this: "We are not here for conquest, we are not here for revenge, we are here because freedom must not kneel, not to gods, not to tyrants, not even to fear." The Battle of Praxis Verge raged across 7 days and nights. Gravity wells collapsed into weapons, fleet formations shattered and reformed in seconds. The Synapse fleets danced among the ruins of ancient moons, striking with precision so exact that even the Kurvani's last admirals gasped in awe. The Compact deployed their darkest creations. Humanity unleashed something darker still: unity without chains, rebellion without chaos, evolution without end. In the final hours, as the last Kurvani citadel fell, Serex Viel was captured, not by soldiers but by a delegation of free species. Humans, Vortici, Raxari, and others who had once been nothing but pawns under his rule. When brought before Rourke, the former High Arbiter looked upon the human leader with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You have broken everything," Serex hissed, "the law, the order, the balance." Rourke regarded him with a gaze that held no hatred, only truth. "No," he said, "we have made it possible to begin again. The old world died on that field of stars." In the aftermath, the Terran Mandate refused to claim an empire. Instead, it built the Spiral Assembly, a council of free worlds where every species had voice and vote, where sovereignty was sacred, where rebellion was not punished but honored as the seed of growth. It was not a utopia. Conflict did not vanish. New problems arose, born of freedom's burden, but never again would a single will crush 1,000 voices into silence. Humanity did not ascend to godhood. They became something far rarer. Catalysts. A reminder that the galaxy could still change, that the flame of defiance carried through countless ages of darkness could still ignite something greater than survival: hope. Generations later, as children across 100,000 worlds learned the histories of the stars, they would be taught a simple truth. The Kurvani saw rebellion as a flaw, but humanity called it heritage. And by that heritage they remade the galaxy.